For 5 years, Eleanor Andrea was a ghost in her own marriage, a quiet footnote in the glamorous life of her husband, Marcus. To him, she was reliable, steady, plain. To his mistress, a woman named Tiffany Dubois, she was a running joke, the beige wallpaper he was inexplicably stuck with. They laughed about her in Michelin star restaurants and whispered about her in the beds of boutique hotels. They thought they knew her. They thought she was a simple, unassuming academic with a modest inheritance. They were about to learn that the quietest people often have the loudest secrets, and that sometimes wallpaper doesn't just hide cracks in the wall. Sometimes it hides a vault. And the door was about to swing wide open. The first undeniable proof of the affair came to Eleanor not as a lipstick stain or a stray text message, but as a scent. It was Chanel No. 5, a classic, but on her husband, Marcus, it was anachronistic and cloying. He smelled of it when he came home late on Tuesday nights, the sharp, aldehydic floral clinging to the fibers of his expensive wool coat. It was a perfume Eleanor would never wear. Her own preference was for subtle unisex scents with notes of sandalwood and vetiver. Scents that didn't announce themselves, that you only noticed when you were close. This scent screamed. It was the perfume of a woman who wanted to be noticed, a woman who marked her territory. Marcus Andrea was a man built on appearances. As a senior partner at Sterling & Croft, one of New York's most prestigious architectural firms, his life was a curated gallery of success. His suits were Tom Ford, his watch a Patek Philippe, and his wife Eleanor was in his mind the perfect unobtrusive accessory. She was intelligent with a PhD in computational linguistics, but she was quiet. She didn't network. She didn't preen for the society pages. She wore her mousy brown hair in a simple bun, favored practical, well-made clothes in muted colors, and seemed more comfortable in her sprawling, book-lined home office than at any gala or fundraiser. He had once loved that about her. In the beginning, her quiet brilliance was a fascinating puzzle. He'd felt like the only one who truly understood the fire behind her calm grey eyes. But over the years, his ambition had outgrown his appreciation. He craved a partner who reflected his own perceived brilliance, a woman who glittered. And Tiffany Dubois glittered. She was a high-end real estate broker with a mane of blonde hair, a surgically perfected figure, and a laugh that could be heard from across any crowded room. She and Marcus had met at a gallery opening, and the connection was immediate and transactional. She saw in him a ticket to the upper echelons of New York society, and he saw in her the dazzling reflection he so desperately wanted to see of himself. Their affair was an open secret in their small, gilded circle. They were careless, emboldened by Marcus's certainty that Eleanor was too meek, too absorbed in her little academic projects to ever suspect, let alone confront him. "What does she even do all day?" Tiffany once asked, lounging in a suite at the Baccarat Hotel, tracing the lapel of his jacket. "Translate dead languages, count dust motes." Marcus chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "She does some sort of data analysis consulting for obscure tech firms. It pays surprisingly well, keeps her busy. Honestly, it's perfect. She manages the house, pays the bills from her trust fund, and doesn't ask too many questions." "A trust fund, baby." Tiffany sneered softly, a note of jealousy in her voice. "Figures. The plain ones always have family money. They never have to actually try." This was the narrative they had built, the one that made their betrayal palatable. Eleanor was a harmless, boring heiress. A placeholder, but they were wrong about the money. There was no trust fund. That was a story Eleanor had allowed Marcus to believe a simple explanation for why their finances were never a concern. The truth was far more complex. The truth was hidden behind a firewall, an encrypted server, and a company name that meant nothing to the outside world, Ethelred Analytics. One Thursday afternoon, Eleanor was in her home office. The room was the heart of their sprawling Upper West Side brownstone, yet Marcus rarely entered it. It was her sanctuary, filled not with the novels and poetry he imagined, but with walls of monitors displaying cascading lines of code and complex data visualizations. A silent humming server rack stood in the corner, its blinking lights a secret pulse. Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the custom security software she had written and installed on Marcus's devices years ago, a precaution taken not out of suspicion of infidelity, but out of a professional habit of securing her digital life. It had flagged a calendar entry. Event: the Metropolitan Benefactors Gala. Attendees: Marcus Andrea +1 T. Dubois. Her blood ran cold, not because he was taking Tiffany, but because of the audacity. This wasn't some discreet dinner. The Benefactors Gala was the pinnacle of the New York social season. To take his mistress there was not just a betrayal, it was a public declaration. It was a statement that his wife was no longer relevant. She stared at the screen, her face impassive. The scent of Chanel No. 5 seemed to linger in the air, a phantom of the insult to come. He was going to erase her. He and his glittering, loud, obvious woman were going to stand in the spotlight and render her invisible. A slow, cold resolve settled in her chest. For years she had maintained her privacy, separating her professional life from her personal one with surgical precision. She had allowed Marcus to see her as plain as simple because it was easier. It gave her the freedom to build her empire in the shadows, to become one of the most powerful and anonymous figures in the world of predictive analytics and AI. She had built a fortress of quiet success, and Marcus and his mistress were about to try and tear it down with a party invitation. Eleanor swiveled in her chair and typed a short, encrypted message to her assistant. To Anya Sharma. Subject: Gala. Anya, please clear my schedule for the evening of the 15th and reach out to Jean-Paul at Armani. Tell him I need the suit we discussed, the black one. Also have the Phantom prepared. I believe it's time for Dr. Andrea to make a public appearance. She hit send. On one of her monitors, a real-time stock market analysis program she'd designed was tracking the precarious financials of a well-known architectural firm. Sterling and Croft. Its stock was plummeting, propped up only by one major client, a client whose own stability was now in question, a client whose data was currently being analyzed by her company. Marcus thought this gala was his stage. He had no idea it was about to become hers. The week leading up to the gala was a masterclass in Marcus's casual cruelty. He treated Eleanor with a kind of patronizing sympathy, as if she were a sick relative he had to humor. "Darling," he said over breakfast, 2 days after she'd seen the calendar invite, not looking up from his tablet. "The Benefactors Gala is on the 15th. It's a terribly stuffy affair, you'd hate it. All flash, no substance. I have to go. Of course, Croft is insisting I show my face and press the flesh. I'll be home late." Eleanor simply stirred her coffee, her expression unreadable. "I see. Business, then." "Endless." He sighed, the picture of a burdened executive. "You know how it is. I'll make it up to you. We'll go to that little Italian place you like next weekend." He was giving her an alibi for his own infidelity, a pre-packaged excuse she was meant to accept without question. He was so confident in her passivity that he didn't even bother to craft a convincing lie. The arrogance was breathtaking. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Tiffany Dubois was preparing for her grand debut. For her, this gala was not just a party. It was a coronation. Attending on the arm of Marcus Andrea, a senior partner at Sterling and Croft, was her official entry into the world she'd clawed her way towards her entire life. She was no longer just the other woman. She was the woman on the verge of becoming the woman. She spent a small fortune on a shimmering backless scarlet gown by Marchesa. It was a dress designed to be seen to be photographed, to dominate a room. "It's perfect," her friend, another social climber named Chloe, breathed during the final fitting. "You look like a movie star. Marcus won't be able to take his eyes off you." "It's not Marcus I'm worried about," Tiffany said, turning in front of the three-way mirror, a predatory smile on her face. "It's everyone else. When they see me with him, they'll know. The whispers will start. Who is she? And then, have you heard about his wife?" Chloe giggled. "The Beige librarian." "What's her name again? Eleanor." Tiffany corrected her voice, dripping with disdain. "Sounds like a character from a dusty old novel. I saw a picture of her once on Marcus's desk. Brown hair, no makeup, wearing some hideous cardigan. I swear the woman is allergic to color. He says she's brilliant, but what's the point of being brilliant if you look like you manage the accounts for a funeral home?" She leaned closer to the mirror, adjusting a strap. "This gala is the beginning of the end for her. Once Julian Croft and the other board members see me with Marcus, they'll understand. I am the kind of woman a man like him needs by his side. Not some academic mouse." The conversation was a familiar one. Tiffany's mockery of Eleanor was a constant refrain in her relationship with Marcus, a way of reinforcing her own value by diminishing her rivals. She painted Eleanor as a sexless, passionless creature, a relic from a past Marcus was eager to shed, and Marcus, weak and desperate for validation, never corrected her. He let her build this fantasy because it fed his own. He was the dynamic, powerful man, trapped in a dull marriage rescued by a vibrant goddess. It was a story as old as time, and he was the willing, foolish protagonist. What neither of them knew was that the stage they were so carefully setting was being observed from above. Eleanor, through Ethelred's vast data-gathering capabilities, saw it all. She saw the charge for the Marchesa gown on the shared credit card she had given Marcus years ago for emergencies. She saw their dinner reservations at Per Se. She saw the booking for a suite at the Mandarin Oriental for the night of the gala. Each transaction was a small, sharp sting, not of a heartbreaking, but of a resolve hardening into diamond. Her own preparations were silent and precise. Anya Sharma, her fiercely loyal chief of staff, handled every detail with discreet efficiency. The Armani suit arrived in a plain box delivered by a private courier. It was not a dress designed for seduction, but a statement of power. It was fashioned from midnight black silk and wool, with a sharp architectural cut. The jacket had severe shoulders and a single obsidian button. The trousers were sleek and fell perfectly to a pair of understated but lethally expensive Manolo Blahnik stilettos. There would be no flashy jewelry, just a pair of simple diamond studs, and the watch on her wrist, a Patek Philippe Calatrava. A far more subtle and sophisticated model than the one Marcus wore. On the day of the gala, Marcus was a bundle of nervous energy. He laid out his tuxedo, fussed with his cufflinks, and practiced his charming smile in the mirror. Eleanor found him in their walk-in closet. She was dressed in a simple silk robe, her hair still damp from a shower. "Big night," she said, her voice neutral. He started caught off guard. "Oh, Ellie, you're here. Yes, just getting ready for the fundraiser." He fumbled with his bow tie. "Don't wait up." "I won't," she said. She reached out and, with practiced ease, perfectly knotted his tie for him. Her fingers were cool and steady. For a moment, he felt a flicker of the old connection, the quiet competence he had once admired. He looked into her eyes, searching for something. Suspicion, sadness, anger. He found nothing. It was like looking at the calm surface of a deep, dark lake. "There," she said, smoothing his lapels. "You look perfect. Go on. Don't be late for your important business." He felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of relief. She didn't suspect a thing. He was getting away with it. He kissed her on the cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture, and hurried out the scent of his expensive cologne, filling the air. Eleanor stood motionless for a long moment after he left. Then she walked to her own side of the closet, past the neat rows of grey and navy business attire she wore for her video conferences. At the very back, behind a false panel she had designed herself, was another wardrobe. It held the clothes of Dr. Eleanor Andrea, the enigmatic founder of Ethelred Analytics. She took out the Armani suit. As she dressed, she wasn't transforming into someone else. She was simply taking off a costume she had been wearing for years. The plain wife was a role she had played. Tonight, she was stepping back into her own skin. Downstairs, a quiet professional man named Mr. Davies, her head of security and personal driver, was waiting. He had been with her for 7 years and knew more about her life than Marcus ever would. "The Phantom is ready, Dr. Andrea," he said, his voice a respectful murmur. "Thank you, Robert," she replied. "We'll take the scenic route. There's no need to rush." As she stepped out into the cool evening air, she looked up at the lights of the city. Marcus and Tiffany were probably in a cab by now, giddy with anticipation. They believed they were on their way to the party of the year. They were oblivious to the fact that they were driving straight into a carefully laid trap, one where the bait, the trap and the hunter, were all the same woman. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a breathtaking sea of power and influence. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a diamond-like glitter over the assembled guests. The air hummed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the subtle strains of a string quartet playing Vivaldi. This was the beating heart of New York's elite, and tonight Marcus Andrea and Tiffany Dubois were determined to conquer it. They made a striking couple. Marcus tall and handsome in his classic tuxedo, and Tiffany a vibrant slash of scarlet against the room's more muted tones. Her Marchesa gown was as intended a magnet for all eyes. She clung to Marcus's arm, her laughter a little too loud, her smile a little too wide. She was performing and she was loving it. "Marcus, darling, look." "There's Julian Croft by the Rodin," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "We have to go say hello." Julian Croft was the senior founding partner of the firm, a silver-haired lion in his late 70s with a reputation for corporate savagery. His approval was crucial for Marcus's ambition to one day lead the company. As they approached, Marcus put on his most charming face. "Julian, a wonderful evening as always." Croft turned his eyes coolly appraising. They flickered over Tiffany for a fraction of a second, a dismissal so swift it was almost imperceptible before landing on Marcus. "Andrea, good of you to come. Sterling is holding court by the bar, schmoozing the real estate moguls. You should be there." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. "Of course," Marcus said, his smile tightening. "Julian, I'd like you to meet Tiffany Dubois." Tiffany extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Mr. Croft, It's an absolute honor. I've admired your firm's work for years. Croft gave her a limp, brief handshake. A pleasure, he said, his tone suggesting the exact opposite. He turned his back to her and spoke directly to Marcus. The Harrison account is looking shaky, Marcus. Very shaky. I hope you have a contingency plan. Before Marcus could respond, Croft had moved on, leaving them standing in his wake. Tiffany's face was flushed with anger. The old fossil, he barely looked at me. He's just old-school darling, Marcus stammered, trying to recover. Don't worry about him. Come on, let's get a drink. But the gloss of the evening had already started to tarnish for Tiffany. She had expected to be welcomed, celebrated. Instead, she felt like an outsider. She saw the wives of the other partners, women dressed in elegant, understated gowns from Oscar de la Renta and Carolina Herrera, chatting in tight, closed circles. They glanced at her, their eyes lingering on her revealing dress before they turned away, sharing whispered comments. She was too bright, too loud, too new. Her insecurity quickly curdled into resentment, and she aimed it at the one person who wasn't there to defend herself. Eleanor. Spotting a group of younger associates and their dates, Tiffany steered Marcus towards them, ready to hold court with an audience that might be more appreciative. Marcus, you poor thing, having to come to these things alone so often. One of the sycophantic junior architects, a man named Liam, said. Tiffany laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, he's not alone tonight. It's just that his wife, well, she's not really the Gala type. She's more of a library type. The group chuckled politely. I mean, can you imagine? Tiffany continued, emboldened, her voice carrying. Eleanor in a place like this. What would she even wear? A tweed suit with elbow patches. She'd probably try to catalogue the sculptures. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He hated when she did this in front of his colleagues, but he was too cowardly to stop her. Her mockery of his wife had become a part of their dynamic, and to defend Eleanor now would be to unravel the entire narrative of his affair. I just don't get it, Tiffany mused, taking a large sip of champagne. Why a man at the top of his game, a man with such taste, would settle for something so beige. She looked directly at Marcus, her eyes challenging him. It's like owning a Ferrari and keeping it in the garage to drive a sensible sedan. The metaphor hung in the air, crude and obvious. The group fell silent, unsure how to react. They all knew about the affair, but to have it laid bare so brazenly was embarrassing. It was in that pregnant, awkward silence that a new sound cut through the ballroom's gentle hum. It wasn't loud, but it was different. It was the sound of a collective, indrawn breath. Heads were turning towards the grand entrance. A murmur rippled through the crowd, starting at the door and spreading like a wave. The string quartet seemed to falter for a beat. Marcus and Tiffany turned to see what the commotion was. Outside, visible through the towering glass doors, a car had just pulled up. It wasn't one of the endless stream of black town cars and Escalades. This was a Rolls-Royce, a phantom, long and sleek and silent as a shadow, its midnight blue paint so deep it looked black. The iconic spirit of ecstasy on the hood seemed to glow under the museum's lights. This wasn't just a car. It was a declaration of immense, almost obscene wealth. Even in this room of millionaires and billionaires, a private phantom commanded attention. A liveried doorman, his posture suddenly ramrod straight, rushed to open the rear door. Who the hell is that? Tiffany breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and envy. Must be one of the tech billionaires from the West Coast. Marcus stared, equally transfixed. A single elegant leg emerged from the car, followed by a slender figure. The person was not wearing a gown. They were wearing a suit, a black suit of such perfect tailoring that it seemed to absorb the light around it. The figure stepped onto the red carpet and turned tall towards the entrance. The light caught her face. Tiffany's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sharp crack that no one heard. Her perfectly painted smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Because the woman walking towards them with the calm, unhurried grace of a queen entering her court was not a stranger. It wasn't a tech billionaire. It was his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor paused at the entrance, her grey eyes sweeping across the ballroom. She wasn't looking for anyone in particular. She was simply taking the measure of the room, owning the space before she even set foot in it. The whispers intensified a rising tide of speculation. "Who is that? Is she a new board member? I've never seen her before." She began to walk, and her movement was a study in quiet power. She didn't have Tiffany's practiced hip-swaying saunter. Her stride was confident, economical, and utterly commanding. The crowd, as if by some unspoken signal, seemed to part before her, creating a natural pathway. Marcus and Tiffany were frozen, rooted to the spot. It was as if a character from a black-and-white film had suddenly walked into their vibrant Technicolor world, only to reveal that she was the one in control of the entire production. What is she doing here?" Tiffany hissed, her voice a strangled whisper. "And that car, that suit, where did she get that?" Marcus couldn't answer. His mind was a frantic mess of confusion. This was not his Eleanor. His Eleanor was the woman who wore sensible shoes and forgot to take the price tag off a new blouse. His Eleanor was the woman who thought a splurge was buying a first-edition book. This woman looked like she could buy the entire publishing house and turn it into a parking lot if she felt so inclined. The patek on her wrist was a quiet but clear signal. To those in the know, it was a timepiece that cost more than Tiffany's car. As Eleanor drew closer, Julian Croft, the man who had dismissed Tiffany with a single glance, broke away from his conversation. His face, usually a mask of stern indifference, lit up with genuine warmth and respect. "Eleanor, my dear, you made it," he boomed, moving to greet her. He didn't offer a handshake. He kissed her on both cheeks in the European style. "We were afraid you'd be too buried in work to grace us with your presence." The room collectively gasped. Julian Croft did not gush. Eleanor smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed her face, making her look younger and more beautiful than Marcus had seen her in years. "Julian, I promised I wouldn't miss it. The museum's new wing is a worthy cause." "Worthy of your support, we hope," Croft said, his tone deferential. "Come, let me introduce you to the Secretary of Commerce. He's been dying to pick your brain about AI's impact on global trade." He steered her away towards the most powerful knot of people in the room, leaving Marcus and Tiffany in the wake of their passage standing next to a puddle of spilled champagne. The junior associates Tiffany had been holding court with were now staring at her, their expressions a delicious mix of pity and morbid curiosity. The Beige librarian had just been greeted like royalty by the firm's most feared partner, while Tiffany in her scarlet look-at-me dress had been utterly and completely ignored, the Ferrari and sedan metaphor. She had so proudly trotted out now seemed pathetic and absurd. She had mocked a sensible sedan, only to watch it transform into a stealth bomber. "I don't understand," she stammered, turning to Marcus, her eyes wild with confusion and fury. How does she know Julian Croft? And what did he mean her support? Is her little trust fund that big? Marcus was reeling. He had worked for Julian Croft for 15 years and had never been treated with an ounce of the warmth Eleanor had just received. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Everything. He thought he knew about his own life, his own marriage, his own wife, had just been vaporized. For the next hour they watched paralyzed as Eleanor moved through the gala. She was a quiet nexus of power. She didn't command attention with loud laughter or grand gestures. She commanded it with her presence. Tech moguls Marcus only read about in Forbes approached her, with a reverence usually reserved for heads of state. A formidable woman, who ran one of Wall Street's biggest hedge funds, listened intently as Eleanor spoke, nodding seriously. She wasn't networking. She was holding audiences. She never once looked in Marcus and Tiffany's direction. It was the most devastating cut of all. She wasn't ignoring them. She was genuinely, completely and utterly unconcerned with their existence. They were irrelevant. The final crushing blow came during the charity auction. The final item was a private tour of the museum's archives, with the chief curator, followed by a dinner. It was a unique, highly coveted prize. The bidding was fierce, quickly rising past $50,000. Then from the back of the room, a calm voice spoke. $250,000. It was Eleanor. A hush fell over the ballroom. The auctioneer, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly. "I have $250,000 from Dr. Andrea," he called out. He scanned the room. Going once, going twice, no one dared to bid against her. It wasn't just the amount. It was the way she had said it. A simple statement of fact. "Sold!" the auctioneer cried, pointing his gavel at her. "To the very generous Dr. Eleanor Andrea." A round of applause broke out. Eleanor gave a slight, gracious nod. Dr. Andrea. The name echoed in Marcus's ears. She hadn't used her professional title in a social setting since they were first married. He had told her it was pretentious. Now, hearing it in this room from these people, he realized it wasn't pretense. It was her identity, an identity he had never bothered to understand. Tiffany finally broke. "I can't." She choked out, her face pale beneath her expensive makeup. "I can't stay here." She turned and fled, pushing her way through the crowd, her scarlet dress a banner of her own humiliation. Marcus stood alone for a moment longer. He finally caught Eleanor's eye across the crowded room. There was no anger in her gaze, no triumph. There was just a cool, clear assessment. It was the look a scientist gives a specimen under a microscope just before classifying it as inert. Then she turned away back to her conversation with the Secretary of Commerce. In that single dismissive glance, Marcus Andrea understood. His marriage was over. His affair was a pathetic joke. And his entire life was a lie built on a foundation he had never even known existed. He had thought he was the architect of his own world, but he had merely been a tenant in hers. And he had just received his eviction notice. The drive home was a silent, tension-filled ordeal. Marcus had found Tiffany sobbing in the back of a taxi, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. Her fury had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, wet ash of humiliation. "Who is she, Marcus?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Who is she really?" "I don't know," he answered, and it was the most honest thing he had said in years. He let himself into the brownstone around 2 a.m. The house was quiet. He expected to find Eleanor waiting for him, ready for the screaming match, the recriminations, the tears. He had steeled himself for it. Instead, he found her in the library, sitting in a leather armchair under the soft glow of a reading lamp. She was dressed in simple silk pajamas, a thick book open in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her expression as calm as it had been at the gala. The formidable Armani suit was gone, but the power it had signified remained, an almost palpable aura in the room. "You're home," she said. It wasn't a question. "Eleanor, Ellie, we need to talk." He stammered, his pre-planned anger dissolving into a pathetic plea. "Tonight. I don't understand any of it. The car, the suit, Julian Croft, Dr. Andrea." She dog-eared her page and closed the book, setting it aside with deliberate care. "There's not much to understand, Marcus. You simply never asked the right questions." "Questions? What questions? I thought you were a consultant. I thought you had a trust fund from your parents." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "My parents were teachers, Marcus. They left me a wonderful inheritance of books and a love of learning, but certainly not a trust fund. I let you believe that, because it was a simple answer to a complex reality, and frankly, you were never interested in complexity. You were interested in ease." She stood up and walked over to a beautiful antique globe that sat in the corner of the room. She gave it a gentle spin. "You thought my company was a little academic project," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "Ethelred Analytics is not, little Marcus. We are a global leader in predictive AI and quantum data analysis. We advise governments, financial institutions, and the top 10 companies on the Fortune 500 list. We don't just analyze the market. In many ways, we shape it." Marcus stared at her, his mouth agape. The name Ethelred tickled a memory. He'd seen it in the financial news, a mysterious, privately held ghost company that was making massive disruptive waves in the tech sector. It was spoken of in hushed, awed tones on Wall Street. You're Ethelred," he whispered, the scale of his ignorance washing over him like a tidal wave. "I founded it in my dorm room at MIT with a single server I built myself," she confirmed, her gaze steady. "The brownstone, the cars, our lifestyle, that wasn't from a trust fund. That was from me. From my work. The work you dismissed as counting dust motes." The words Tiffany had spoken, so cruel and ignorant, now echoed in the room as a monument to his own foolishness. He sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I tried to in the beginning," Eleanor replied, her voice devoid of emotion. "Do you remember about 8 years ago? I tried to explain my work on algorithmic trading. You patted my hand and said, 'That's nice, honey.' Then changed the subject to the new design for the Henderson Tower. You didn't want a partner, Marcus. You wanted an audience. So I stopped trying. I built my world, and I let you live in yours. The problem is you assumed your world was the only one." She walked over to her desk and picked up a thick, leather-bound folder. She placed it on the coffee table in front of him. "These are the divorce papers," she said calmly. "My lawyer, Jessica Albright, will be in touch with yours tomorrow." Marcus flinched, as if struck. "Divorce Ellie, no. We can work this out. I was a fool. I know that now, Tiffany. She meant nothing. It was a mistake." His pleas were desperate, but they rang hollow. He wasn't fighting for his wife. He was fighting for his lifestyle. He was a drowning man, clinging to the wreckage, only to realize the wreckage was a nuclear submarine, and it was sailing away without him. "Yes, it was a mistake," Eleanor agreed. "Your mistake was not the affair, Marcus. That was just a symptom. Your mistake was your profound, staggering underestimation. You looked at me every day for 12 years, and you never once truly saw me." He reached for the folder, his hands trembling. "Our assets. We'll have to split everything. Eleanor's gaze hardened. No, we won't. Do you remember that stack of papers I asked you to sign before we got married? The ones you called boring financial stuff and didn't even read? He remembered. He had been impatient, eager to get to their dinner reservation. He'd scrawled his name on a dozen pages without a second glance. That was an ironclad prenuptial agreement, Eleanor stated flatly. It stipulates a complete and total separation of all assets pre-existing and future. Ethelred Analytics and everything derived from it is mine and mine alone. The house is in a trust controlled by my company. The cars are corporate assets. Even the art on the walls is part of the Ethelred portfolio. She paused, letting the weight of her words crush him. You, Marcus, are entitled to exactly what you brought into this marriage, a portfolio of student loan debt, which I paid off for you, and your collection of designer suits. My lawyers are prepared to be generous. We will offer you a one-time settlement of $500,000, contingent on you signing a permanent non-disclosure agreement. $500,000. To the man who thought he was a multi-millionaire, it was a pittance, an insult. You can't do this, he whispered, horrified. I can, she said. And I am. She turned to leave the room, then stopped at the door, her back to him. Oh, and one more thing. You might want to update your resume. What are you talking about? My job. Julian Croft is an old friend, and he's also on my board of directors, she said, finally turning to face him, her eyes like chips of ice. He's been aware of your performance issues for some time, but the real problem is your firm's largest client, Harrison Consolidated. Marcus felt a new, deeper dread. The Harrison account was his lifeline, the only thing keeping the firm afloat. Ethelred Analytics, Eleanor said, delivering the killing blow. Executed a hostile takeover of Harrison Consolidated this afternoon. The acquisition was finalized while we were at the Gala. As the new owners, our first order of business will be to review all outstanding contracts. I'm afraid Sterling and Croft's services will no longer be required. The world tilted on its axis. He hadn't just lost his wife. He hadn't just lost his wealth. He had just lost his entire career. He had been so busy playing king in his imaginary castle that he hadn't noticed the ground beneath it being bought, sold, and rezoned by the quiet queen he'd locked away in the tower. He was left alone in the library, staring at the divorce papers, a ruined man in a house that was no longer his, destroyed by a woman he had never known. The days that followed were a cascade of humiliations for Marcus. True to Eleanor's word, her lawyer, Jessica Albright, a woman with a reputation so sharp she could have filleted a shark with a business card, contacted his. The initial meeting was a bloodbath. Marcus's lawyer, a portly man, accustomed to negotiating generous settlements for his powerful male clients, emerged from the conference room, looking pale and shaken. The prenup is unbreakable, Marcus, he said, loosening his tie. It's a fortress. I've never seen anything like it. Every asset is traced, every corporate structure is airtight. We could fight it, but you'd be paying me for years only to end up with nothing. Take the settlement. Simultaneously, the news about Harrison Consolidated broke, sending shockwaves through the architectural world. Sterling and Croft, having lost its whale client, immediately announced massive layoffs. Marcus, as the partner who had managed the now-defunct account, was the first to go. He wasn't just fired. He was publicly disgraced, forced to clear out his office in a single cardboard box under the pitying gaze of the colleagues he once lorded over. Julian Croft didn't even grant him an exit interview. His financial ruin was swift and total. The credit cards, which he belatedly realized were all tied to an account controlled by Eleanor's company, were declined. He was forced to move out of the brownstone and into a cramped, soulless corporate apartment paid for by his severance. The Patek Philippe on his wrist felt like a mockery, a relic from a life that was no longer his. His first call was to Tiffany. He expected sympathy, an offer to stay with her, a promise that they were in this together. Instead, he got a cold dose of reality. "You're broke," she asked, her voice flat and devoid of the breathy affection he was used to. "It's temporary, Tiff," he pleaded. "Just a setback. That bitch, she planned this all. So the Rolls-Royce, the suit, the company. That was all her." Tiffany interrupted, the pieces clicking into place in her ruthlessly practical mind. "You don't have anything. The house isn't yours. No, but don't call me again Marcus," she said, and the line went dead. He had been a means to an end for her, a stepping stone to a world of wealth and status. Now that he was stripped of both, he was useless. A day later, he saw her pictured on a gossip website, laughing on the arm of a grizzled elderly hedge fund manager. She was wearing a new diamond bracelet. She had moved on before his office chair was even cold. The world he had so carefully constructed, the powerful career, the glamorous mistress, the adoring colleagues had been a house of cards, and Eleanor had just blown it all down with a single, quiet breath. He was adrift. The friends who had once clamored for his dinner invitations now avoided his calls. He was no longer a player. He was a cautionary tale whispered about at cocktail parties. The man who had it all and lost it because he couldn't see what was right in front of him. Meanwhile, Eleanor's life continued, but with a fundamental shift. The veil of privacy she had so carefully maintained was partially lifted. The news of Ethelred's acquisition of Harrison Consolidated, coupled with her dramatic appearance at the Gala, had put Dr. Eleanor Andrea on the map. Forbes and the Wall Street Journal ran profiles on the ghost CEO, the quiet genius who had outplayed everyone. She was inundated with interview requests and speaking invitations, most of which she politely declined through Anya. She sold the brownstone. It held too many memories, not of heartbreak, but of a life half-lived, a role she had played for too long. She moved into a stunning penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a minimalist space of glass and steel filled with light and art. It was a space that was entirely hers. One afternoon, Anya came into her new office, a tablet in her hand. "Dr. Andrea, there's something you should see." It was a security alert from an exclusive club in Soho that used Ethelred's facial recognition software. The system had flagged a non-member attempting entry using a false name. The image attached was of Tiffany Dubois, looking desperate and gaudy, being firmly turned away by a bouncer. She was trying to crash a party to get close to a new potential benefactor. Without a man like Marcus to vouch for her, she was back to where she started, on the outside looking in. Eleanor looked at the image for a moment, then simply nodded. "Thank you, Anya. That will be all." There was no sense of triumph, no vindictive pleasure. It was just data. Tiffany was a variable that had been rendered irrelevant, a problem that had solved itself. Eleanor's focus was already elsewhere. She was channeling the company's newfound public profile into a cause that mattered to her. She established the Andrea Foundation, a massive non-profit dedicated to funding STEM education for young women in underserved communities. She started guest lecturing at MIT and Columbia, not as a CEO, but as a professor, sharing her knowledge and passion with a new generation. She was discovering a new kind of power. It wasn't the silent, hidden power of her anonymous company. It was the visible, tangible power of influence and mentorship. She found she enjoyed it. She enjoyed seeing the spark of understanding in a young student's eyes, enjoyed funding a project that could change the world, enjoyed being town, finally, for exactly who she was. Her life was no longer divided. The quiet academic and the powerhouse CEO had merged into one integrated, formidable woman. She was still calm, still preferred sandalwood to Chanel, but there was a new light in her eyes. It was the light of freedom. 6 months passed. Autumn painted Central Park in hues of gold and crimson outside Eleanor's penthouse window. The storm of her divorce had subsided, leaving a calm, clear new reality in its wake. The name Marcus Andrea was now just a faint echo, a footnote in a past she had decisively closed. One crisp October morning, she was walking through Soho on her way to a gallery opening. She was dressed casually in dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, and a beautifully cut tweed blazer, a subtle nod to the librarian persona she had once inhabited, now reclaimed and worn with confidence. She was anonymous again, but this time by choice, not by imposition. As she waited for the light to change, a man across the street caught her eye. He was haggard, his expensive suit now looking ill-fitting and worn. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, his face etched with the kind of deep, weary lines that come from stress and failure. He was arguing with a parking attendant over a ticket on a dented second-hand sedan. It was Marcus. He hadn't seen her. He was too consumed by his own small, miserable world. The man who once commanded boardrooms was now battling over a $50 fine, his voice thin and reedy. All the polish, the arrogance, the curated charm. It was gone, stripped away to reveal the weak, insecure man beneath. The light changed. Eleanor crossed the street, walking past him without a second glance. There was no pity in her heart, but there was no malice either. There was only a profound sense of distance. He was a stranger, a man she might have known in another life. His ruin was his own creation, the inevitable consequence of his choices. Her role was simply to stop enabling his fantasy. She continued on her way, her mind already on the next thing, a meeting about a new scholarship program, a complex coding problem. She was mulling over dinner plans with a group of brilliant, funny women who were her friends and colleagues. Her life was full, rich, and forward-looking. Later that evening, Mr. Davies drove her home from the gallery. She was not in the Rolls-Royce Phantom that was reserved for official business. Tonight, she was in a sleek, silent, all-electric Lucid Air, a car chosen for its engineering and understated elegance rather than its status. It suited her perfectly. As they pulled up to her building, she thought about the woman she had been a year ago, the quiet, overlooked wife living in the shadow of a man who didn't deserve her. She thought about the rage and resolve that had led her to the gala. It felt like watching a film about someone else. Her revenge hadn't been loud or explosive. It had been quiet, precise, and absolute. It wasn't about destroying Marcus. It was about revealing the truth of who he was, and more importantly, the truth of who she was. He had built his life on a lie, and she had simply turned on the lights. Stepping out of the car and into the warm lobby of her building, Andrea felt a sense of peace. She had not only reclaimed her life, she had built a new one on a foundation of her own, making a foundation of brilliance, integrity, and self-worth. The beige wallpaper was gone forever. In its place was a window, and the view was infinite. And that's the story of Eleanor Andrea. A powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones holding all the cards. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's about self-worth and the quiet strength that builds when no one is watching. It teaches us that true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room, but about knowing the value of your own silence and choosing the perfect moment to speak your truth. Marcus and Tiffany saw a plain wife. They failed to see the queen on the chessboard, patiently waiting to say, "Checkmate." What did you think of Eleanor's incredible transformation and her perfectly executed plan? Was it karma, or was it a masterpiece of strategy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of hidden strength and karmic justice, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that prove you should never, ever judge a book by its cover.